going to be trashing your property. They're going to have kids running around tearing up your property. These tenants are bad renters. Section 8 is the very worst. Everybody with a Section 8 tenant is a terrible renter and terrible to rent to. There's so many misconceptions with the Section 8 program. And unfortunately, I had a lot of these misconceptions until I became a landlord who rents out to Section 8 tenants. Before I get into the topic, make sure you like and subscribe. The number one benefit and advantage to renting out to Section 8 tenants is that you have guaranteed rent. So once you find a Section 8 tenant and execute a lease, the rent that's agreed upon, which is usually determined by Section 8, a portion of that rent will be paid for every month by the government, and then a portion of that rent will be paid for by the tenant. In my experience, and other landlords I speak to experience, tenants are paying anywhere from like 10 to 30% of the rent, and then about 90 to 70% of that rent is completely subsidized by the government. That means every month, without fail, you are getting a direct deposit as a landlord to your bank account. This means every month, without fail, regardless of the economic condition, you are being paid rent, which is great as a landlord because it helps you predict your cash flow. Unfortunately, with market rate tenants, life happens and they come across hard economic times. They may lose their job or have a big expense that they must pay for, and then they can no longer pay you rent as a landlord. But this is not the case with Section 8. Even if a tenant loses their job and can no longer afford their portion of the rent, they can just go to the housing authority and let them know whatever economic condition that they're in currently, and Section 8 will usually cover a higher portion of that amount of the rent or the full portion of rent. So no matter what, you're going to be paid the rent that's agreed upon when you sign that lease, which is not always the case with market rate tenants. So you get predictable cash flow with Section 8. That's a reason I love renting out to Section 8 tenants. As a landlord that rents out to Section 8 tenants, I know there's very high demand to get a Section 8 voucher. There's some people who are on that wait list for 10 plus years. And once they get that voucher, many tenants will do everything to make sure that they do not lose it. So this means they have to abide by Section 8 rules, which is making sure that property is tidy, because every 1 to 2 years, in order for that landlord to continue getting payments by Section 8, the property must pass a housing inspection. And in order to pass that housing inspection, it has to be deemed safe for that tenant to be living in. So if that tenant's just causing damage, like many people think that many tenants will do, that property will not pass an inspection. That is why it is in the tenant's best interest to take care of the property. But at the end of the day, as a landlord, this is your property, so you have to be making sure that tenant is taking care of the property. So I would say Section 8 tenants may cause more damage to properties than market rate tenants. This is because many Section 8 voucher holders are single mothers with multiple children. And unfortunately, with children, things tend to get damaged. But it's important as a landlord, you're staying on top of your property, making sure you're visiting that property every couple of months to see if any repairs need to be done, and make those repairs in a timely manner, because at the end of the year, Section 8 is going to want to do another reinspection to make sure you still comply with their rules and regulations in order to continue receiving payments every month. Another great thing about Section 8 properties being in high demand, especially ones in high quality properties ran by high quality landlords, if a tenant moves out, it's not too difficult to find a new tenant, because there is a lower pool of high quality landlords who have high quality properties in highly desirable areas. So if you have one of these, this is a gold mine. You can be very selective of what tenant you want to put in your property. At this point, you could have very strict screening criteria to make sure you only select high quality Section 8 tenants. Another advantage to renting out to Section 8 tenants is that they tend to stay much longer than market rate tenants. The average Section 8 tenant stays at a property for 7 years. Like I mentioned before, part of their rent is already going to be subsidized by the government. In some cases, all of their rent is going to be subsidized by the government. So if you're living in a home that's ran by a high quality landlord, that is in a highly desirable neighborhood with fresh grocery stores, great school districts, safe to walk outside, low crime rates, and you're only paying $10 of that $3,000, when will you move? At that point, you're incentivized to stay because you're in a great situation for your family. Another thing I love about the Section 8 program is not only are you running a business, you're also providing a service to the community. Some landlords just care about the bottom line, but I love that I can change the trajectory of a family situation by allowing them to rent in my home. I make sure I prioritize, I'm buying properties in areas with low crime rates, great school districts, fresh grocery stores, restaurants, and public transportation nearby. This can change a lot for families. Number one reason I hear from tenants of why they want to move from their current property is because they feel unsafe in that environment. Unfortunately, there's a lot of shootings, carjackings, house being broken into. And that's what a lot of people think when they think Section 8 tenants. They think all the properties are located in these highly undesirable neighborhoods. If you're a landlord who owns a property in these highly desirable neighborhoods, it's an even higher demand for Section 8 tenants to want to rent to you, because a lot of these families want the same thing we want for our families. When we want them to be safe, want them to have a great education, want them to have access to fresh food. And unfortunately, a lot of Section 8 properties are in low income areas and they do not provide these benefits. If you have a property that's highly desirable in these tier 1 neighborhoods, I call them, then at this point, many tenants would want to live there. Another advantage to renting out to Section 8 tenants is because if you're a landlord that owns a property in a highly desirable neighborhood, in Chicago specifically, we call those mobility areas, Section 8 is willing to pay more than market rent for the property. This is because they want their tenants with vouchers to live in these areas. But unfortunately, a lot of landlords who own properties in these areas have no issues finding market rate tenants, so they don't even consider the Section 8 market pool. But in order to entice landlords, Section 8 is willing to incentivize them by paying more than market rent in order to allow Section 8 tenants to live there. So you can get anywhere from 30 to 50% more than market rent if you have a property in these mobility areas. So not only are you having predictable cash flow because the government pays the majority of rent every month, you are now being able to get more than market rent for your property. Additionally, hopefully you have a tenant that's going to stay a very long time, and that minimizes your turnover as a landlord. Turnover is when one tenant moves out and another one moves in, and that is the most expensive cost you will incur as a landlord. So that's a wrap on my video on the advantages of renting out to Section 8 tenants. If you know anybody that will benefit from my content, make sure you share my videos with them. The Dr. Investor is out.